This page for a while, you'll know that my favorite anime of all time is Hunter x Hunter. It's not Naruto, it's not JJK, it's not any show that I talk about a ton. It's Hunter x Hunter because I believe both as a manga and as an anime, it's objectively perfect. And therefore, whenever we end up talking about Hunter x Hunter, we usually end up talking about it in a philosophical sense, where I do deep dives on characters, exploring things like how Gon became a monster or how Meruem was misunderstood. However, occasionally when I find the time and the will, I do wade into Hunter x Hunter with my how hard they punchy cap on. Because while I enjoy Hunter x Hunter for the story and the characters, people do wonder how hard those characters punchy. Now, unfortunately, talking about how powerful a character is in the Hunter x Hunter universe isn't the most fun thing of all time, at least to people who only think about anime through the means of power scaling, because Hunter x Hunter is objectively a pretty weak universe. And that's because Togashi can build scale and importance without the planet possibly exploding. It's called good writing. Naruto would be a much better show if they weren't operating chakra mechs by episode 700. But you're probably wondering, Nick, you've already scaled so many things from Hunter x Hunter, like the Freeze family and the Zoldix family and the 15 strongest Nen moves in the entire universe. But the problem with these 3 previous videos that I've done talking about how hard certain characters from Hunter x Hunter punchy is that none of them have included my favorite character in Hunter x Hunter, Meruem, which is crazy because when you're talking about how hard does a character punchy, there is no character in the history of Hunter x Hunter, even up to where the manga is now currently, that punchy's harder than Meruem. Sure, some characters like Tessie Erdnich show a level of promise that would put them at Meruem's level should they master their Nen abilities, but as it currently stands, there is nobody within the Hunter x Hunter universe who could stand against Meruem at his strongest. And thus today, I hope to answer the question, how strong is the strongest character in Hunter x Hunter? That is to say, how strong was Meruem? But before we get to ranking how hard Meruem punchy, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you don't want to find out how hard I punch you guys, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you happen to notice my incredible shirt, that's because I'm wearing my brand new merch, which includes such hits as the Itachi Naruto 2024 political tee, which happens to have an incredible back graphic as Itachi as Bernie Sanders, mittens included. So if you want to support me and also rock some of the greatest anime merch ever made, go to otakusanonymous.net. So Meruem, the final antagonist of the longest arc in Hunter x Hunter. A character so powerful that Isaac Netero, the strongest hunter on Earth, stood next to no chance against him. A chimera ant so strong that Isaac Netero had to show him the darkest weapon that humanity had ever created, the dirty bomb. Without being exploded and subsequently poisoned by Isaac Netero's heart bomb, nothing on Earth would have been able to kill Meruem. At least, nothing in the V6 countries would have been able to kill Meruem, because even though Meruem was the strongest entity in the entirety of the V6 countries, chimera ants are only listed as a B-level threat of entities that have come from the Dark Continent. Meaning that on the coasts of the Dark Continent, there could be entities much stronger than the likes of Meruem. But as it currently stands, the manga is stalemated with everybody on the Black Whale just trying to get to the Dark Continent, so Meruem's the top of the food chain. Now, Meruem was the most powerful offspring of the Chimera Ant Queen, or may not have actually been created by the likes of Pariston. I have an entire video about it. It's called Hunter x Hunter's True Villain Revealed. And after tearing his way out of his mother and subsequently ending her life, Meruem assumed the mantle of the king of the Chimera Ants. And it wasn't just because he was born at the right time, it was because he was the strongest Chimera Ant ever born. See, mere seconds after being born, Meruem was able to swipe the head off of 2 of the Chimera Ant Queen's generals with next to no effort. In fact, before Meruem even began approaching the fullness of the power that he would eventually achieve, the only person who could take a tail swipe from him was his own royal guard, who are genuinely the only other entities on Earth comparable to him in strength. Characters so strong that only one of them, Pito, was killed in a conventional sense. And in exchange for the power required to kill Pito at all, Gon had to give up an entire life's worth of aura, while the other 2 royal guards, Poof and Yuppie, would have continued existing as incredibly powerful entities if they didn't get so close to Meruem after he was hit by the Rose Bomb. Not to mention they also fed the majority of their bodies to Meruem to allow him to regenerate. However, his royal guard, even though the only people on Earth who could compare to them in strength would be people like Crollo, Silva, Zeno, and Isaac Netero, all understood that Meruem was in a class of his own when it came to strength. And if it wasn't for Meruem slowly but surely being humanized by Komogi and being taught the true darkness that resides within human hearts by Isaac Netero, he would have conquered the entire world. And that was Meruem's plan, to cull the entirety of humanity under his rule, to absolve the world of borders and make all of humanity live together. However, in the 40 days that Meruem was alive, he realized that he wasn't actually put on this earth to cull humanity into cooperating with each other, as his experiences with the likes of Netero and Komogi made him realize that humans are capable of an extraordinary amount of strength. And it was through the fear that he learned from Isaac Netero and the love that he learned from Komogi that Meruem realized that the true reason he was put on Earth was to make memories with the people that he loved. So specifically, those people being Komogi. But if that hadn't happened and the world had been subjected to his will, there's nothing they could have done about it. See, genuinely, the world in Isaac Netero got to battle against Meruem at his weakest, or at least as weak as they were ever going to get a chance to fight him at. See, the second that Meruem ripped his way out of his mother, he was the strongest character the universe had ever introduced. Meruem got stronger every single day. See, outside of the fact that Meruem was born incredibly powerful, he was born with an intellect that almost no human on Earth could even begin to wrestle with. While waiting for the entirety of the country he was now ruling over to be culled to be used as a meat farm, Meruem decides to pick up board games to teach himself strategy. He then proceeds to, simply by reading a couple of textbooks on these games and playing a couple of matches against the country's champions in these games, become so good at each and every single one of these specific board games that he's able to outclass the country champion. And thus, even when it came to learning things, Meruem was supernatural. But it goes further than this. Well, obviously Meruem was able to read and react and break down the movements of others in order to figure out how best to beat them at a rate at which would be impossible for any other entity on Earth. Meruem also had other ways to get stronger. See, Meruem, outside of increasing his intelligence, could also increase his abilities as a Nen user by consuming other Nen users. See, the way that Chimera ants are made in the first place is that the queen Chimera ant eats a bunch of different kinds of foods, and then those foods are manifested through the children that she has. So if the Chimera ant queen only ate salmon, she would only have salmon Chimera ants. Now, this is why the Chimera ant queen wanted such high quality food, so she could make a high quality king, which is the only way I'll be referred to from now on. However, when it came to chimerizing, all other Chimera ants were stuck after they were born. And to a degree, Meruem was, but at the same time, he wasn't. See, in the beginning, 98% of Meruem's life, he was able to consume other Nen users and either gain their Nen abilities or simply just increase the amount of Nen he had access to. However, after being exposed to the Rose Bomb, he was able to manifest not only the abilities, but the physical traits of people he consumed, which is how he was able to manifest the abilities of Yoshi and Shiapoof. But even before achieving his post-Rose form, he was able to battle against the likes of Isaac Netero, who, even though he was about 150 years old and claimed to only be about at half of his peak strength, was still considered to be the strongest Nen user on Earth. And Meruem fought Isaac Netero without the intention to kill. See, because Netero knew something that Meruem wanted to know: his name. So Meruem battled against the strongest Nen user on Earth, a man able to use the 100 type Guanyin Barstafa without the intention of killing him. And slowly but surely, after being struck hundreds, if not thousands of times by the most powerful Nen technique in the universe, Meruem slowly but surely identified Netero's moves, and not only sliced off one of his legs, but one of his arms, until eventually Meruem was forced to use his strongest move, the Zero Hand, a move which dumped all of the Nen and aura from his body, a move which would have decimated anybody and anything in the universe, but barely broke the skin of Meruem. However, after the Rose's explosion and the absorption of Shiapoof and Yoshi, people like Knuckle believed that in order to oppose this post-Rose Meruem, that entire country's militaries would be necessary. And this makes sense because when you were battling against Meruem, you would need about 100,000 people firing in all directions to hope to hit him, because nobody in your standard military is going to be able to perceive just how fast Meruem is. Moments after Meruem's birth, at the weakest he ever was, he was able to decapitate 2 to squadron leaders without them or any of the other squadron leaders noticing. That is to say that the squadron leaders died faster than anybody in the room could even react to. And his speed didn't stop there, as also his own royal guards were unable to react to his speed. But one could make the argument that they weren't supposed to react to his speed. But you know who was supposed to react to his speed? Zeno and Isaac Netero. And when they initially used their dragon dive to ascend upon the compound that the royal guard and Meruem are living in, for 1 second they're distracted by Pito's aura. And in that 1 second, Meruem manages to get directly between them, without either of them, arguably the two strongest Nen users on Earth, noticing. In fact, Meruem stated that the only time that Isaac Netero is able to match his speed in any regard whatsoever is after the activation of his 100-type move. And to give you a scale of how fast the 100-type Guanyin Bodhisattva is able to attack, in the heat of their battle, when both Meruem and Netero were at their peaks, they were exchanging 1,000 strikes a minute. Now, hypothetically, if you were just punching like this, that wouldn't be that impressive. It boils out to about 16 strikes per second. But that's not how they were fighting. For every single strike that Isaac Netero wanted to launch at Meruem, he would have to pray. And every single strike that Isaac Netero threw hit Meruem, which means in the course of 1 second, there would have to be 16 prayers, 16 contacts, and 16 recoveries. Isn't the fastest Meruem ever got. See, after absorbing Shiapoof and Yuppie, not only did Meruem grow wings that allowed him to fly at supersonic speeds, so fast that Shiapoof believed that his speed had quadrupled, but he was also so fast that the second that he was able to register somebody else around him with his N, he was able to teleport to them and knock them out before they could register what even happened. Now, the reason that I put teleport in quotation marks here is because Meruem gets so fast that people around him believe he is teleporting, but in actuality, he's just traveling at mind-boggling speeds. And even if you were to react to Meruem's speed, it really wouldn't do anything for you. Because genuinely, throughout the entirety of Netero and Meruem's fight, there's only 2 times that Netero injures Meruem. First time that Netero injures Meruem is when he first activates his 100-type Guanyin Bodhisattva. He then uses one of these strikes on Meruem before he activates his Ren, which ends up injuring Meruem, but not severely, just cuts and bruises. After realizing the strength of the opponent he's fighting, Meruem activates his Ren. He then proceeds to take on thousands more of these hits. However, since his Ren is now activated, none of these hits damage him at all. The only other time that Meruem is ever injured by Isaac Netero is the Zero Hand, technique that would evaporate any entity on Earth. And even after Netero was at ground zero of the explosion of the poor man's rose, an essentially nuclear explosion, he was still alive. Well, obviously he was nuggetified. He survived a nuclear explosion to the face and was able to recover from it, albeit for not all that long. On top of this, Meruem was the last of the Chimera ants to die to the poison of the poor man's rose, even though he was at the epicenter of the explosion, meaning that he was injected with more of the poison of the poor man's rose than anybody else. Obviously, Shiapoof and Yuppie gave the majority of their bodies to Meruem, which weakened them substantially. At the same time, they didn't take the entirety of the blast to the face. And we haven't even talked about Meruem's Nen type yet. See, Meruem is an emitter, but unlike almost all other Nen users, Meruem was born with the ability to use Nen, and born with a superhuman amount of aura. A superhuman amount of aura that he was able to increase by consuming other Nen users, specifically by consuming their brains. Now, this technique is known as aura synthesis, which works in a pretty straightforward kind of way. Let's say I have 20 Nen, and Meruem kills me and eats my brain. Meruem would synthesize my Nen for himself. That is to say that Meruem, after consuming me, would have 120 Nen. So the stronger the Nen user that Meruem defeats and eats, the stronger that he gets, or at least the more aura that he gets. Why his post-rose form is so strong? Because he consumed the majority of the bodies of 2 of the strongest Nen users on Earth. And when Meruem is killing you and synthesizing all of your Nen, none of your abilities are lost. They're simply transferred to him. Wild about Meruem is that we never really see him use Nen. That is to say that we don't see him use Nen in the way that Zeno Zoldyck uses Nen, where Zeno as an emitter can do things like his Dragon Dive or his Dragon Fist. See, Meruem more focuses on the basics of Nen, using things like Yo without ever receiving instructions, or using Ren in his battle against Netero to protect himself from the 100-type Guanyin Bodhisattva. However, that changed with post-Rose Meruem, who figured out how to use his Nen in more standard applications. See, the reason that we call Meruem an emitter is because really the only Nen ability we've ever seen him use was an emission technique, and this emission technique was the Rage Blast that he fired off after becoming post-Rose Meruem, a supercharged blast of Nen that completely destroys a mountain. mountain. However, because this is the first time that we ever saw him use a straightforward Nen technique, a lot of people believed for a long time that Meruem was an enhancer. And I actually stand in the camp that Meruem is a specialist who's capable of using all techniques at 100%. Because the thing about aura synthesis is that Meruem consumes the Nen abilities of others. And therefore, if Meruem consumes the body of an enhancer, which is the first person with Nen he actually ever consumes, well, I shouldn't say that like we know that concretely, but the bodyguard that's protecting the dictator of East Gorto, the big bulky guy with the red beret, a lot of people believe he's an enhancer. And therefore, the first Nen that Meruem ever synthesized was that of an enhancer, making Meruem an enhancer until he synthesized more Nen. And therefore, post-Rose Meruem was not only an emitter, but also an enhancer. And also a transmuter. See, the emission technique that allowed Meruem to fire off Rage Blast came from Yuppie, as Yuppie's abilities also were centered around his ability to create massive explosions with the use of his Nen. However, Shiapoof was a transmuter, and Shiapoof used a technique known as Spiritual Message. See, Spiritual Message is an upgraded version of N that has Shiapoof releasing millions of his scales. These scales, when they come into contact with somebody's aura, fluoresce in a specific light pattern, and that specific light pattern is based off of 30 emotions that these scales are able to read. And thus, by reading these light patterns, Shiapoof is able to assess the personality or mental state of the person who these scales are bound onto. On top of this, these scales, when released, if inhaled by regular humans, suppress their ability to make decisions for their own. And much like how Meruem upgraded Yuppie's energy blast to create rage blasts, Meruem upgraded Spiritual Message. However, instead of using scales, Meruem transmuted his aura into photons. And these photons, as they are now light, are able to be spread out from Meruem's body at the speed of light. And these photons hold Meruem's spiritual energy no matter how far they are from his body. And once these photons come into contact with somebody else's aura, it allows him to immediately understand the emotion, the quality, the shape, and tons of other factors about whoever these photons come into contact with. If his photons are in contact with you, he can detect anything about you, even if you're lying. And what's craziest about this is that we've seen Meruem fire these photons in all directions at the speed of light, and when these photons touch people he's interested in and immediately send a registry back to him that someone is there, as fast as the photons have touched that person, Meruem is there, implying that he's light speed. And if that isn't enough for you, he has a fourth ability known as Metamorphosis, which may be a biological ability or a Nen ability, we just don't know. But apparently if Meruem consumes enough of you, he's able to gain your physical abilities, like wings. Now we don't know if Meruem got this ability after the Rose explosion, or if he just hadn't eaten enough of a person prior to the Rose explosion, but what we do know is that he was able to do it after the Rose explosion. He was able to manifest Yuppie's wings. And considering the fact that Yuppie also had the ability to metamorphize, this could just be an ability that he stole from Yuppie. He died like very shortly after he got this ability, so we know very little. But okay, I've done the rundown of all of his abilities, I've told you how big, bad, and scary he is, so now for the true meat of the video, how hard he punching. Fortunately, when it comes to attack potency, we have a very clear feat for Meruem's strongest ever attack, and that's his Rage Blast. And this Rage Blast that he fires off very casually and at no one was enough to decimate an entire mountain. Now, if Meruem possibly got more serious about firing off these Rage Blasts or ever used the ability more than once, there's no reason for us to believe that he wouldn't have been able to achieve a larger blast. And thus, when it comes to attack potency, we have really no reason to put Meruem anywhere other than mountain level plus. The speed, we've pretty much already touched on that. Prior to being post-Rose Meruem, or I guess pre-Rose Meruem, he's able to move at massively supersonic speeds, as he was able to be hit by, recover from, and get back to Isaac Netero 16 times a second. Assuming that on average, the amount of distance he had to cover between being hit and recovering and getting back to Netero was about 100 meters, that's 1,600 meters a second, which is about 3,600 miles an hour. However, all of that pales in comparison to the speed feats he pulled off after becoming post-Rose Meruem, where through the combination of his N and Photon ability, he was able to not only send out photons in all directions, but also catch up to said photons the second those photons registered in aura, making Meruem a speed of light level character. Fortunately for us, Meruem's durability is also very easy to figure out, as Meruem was able to survive the poor man's Rose, a nuclear explosion, which means in that moment, Meruem's durability was somewhere around small city level, as a standard nuclear explosion is able to pretty much evaporate an entire small city. However, after that moment, Meruem's durability is raised by the fact that he consumes Rose, Youppi, and Poof. So post-Rose Meruem's durability is higher than that of small city level. And considering that usually we say if you're able to dish it out, you should be able to receive it, the fact that Meruem is able to fire off Nen Blast capable of wiping entire mountains off the map makes us believe that his durability should also be somewhere around mountain level plus. And when it comes to stamina, we've never once seen Meruem run out of energy in anything. He once got so engrossed in his game with Komogi that he didn't eat or sleep for 3 days and was clearly unaffected. He was able to take thousands of blows from Netero and recover and barely seem winded. Nothing has ever shown us that Meruem is anything less than unlimited stamina. And when it comes to intelligence, he's one of the smartest characters in anime history. With only being 40 days old, Meruem was more intelligent than basically every single human on Earth, with his only problem being that he didn't realize the true darkness that lies within a human heart. So how strong is Meruem? Pretty strong. Stronger than any other character we've seen in Hunter x Hunter up to this point. In short, down the line, if we get more Hunter x Hunter ever, Tessiernich's time travel ability will probably make him the strongest person we've ever seen in Hunter x Hunter, but for the moment, Meruem still holds on to that crown. What do you guys think? Do you believe that my scaling of Meruem is accurate? Tell me in the comments below. While you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Meruem goes to show all of us that it doesn't matter how high your durability is. Love always punches through that hard exterior.